Welcome to Backyard Sugaring. This is Mark Isselhart, Maple Specialist, UVM Extension, based out of the Proctor Maple Research Center.
And I am George Cook, UVM Extension Maple Specialist. I'm located in the Morrisville Extension office, and I hope you enjoy this program. Get a chance to learn how to utilize your trees in your backyard and perhaps make some nice maple syrup.
So as you might imagine, there's quite a bit to cover in a subject like this. Everything from the tree itself, the sugar maple tree, red maple tree, its health, the unique sap flow mechanism that goes into having sap to be collected in the first place, and then the process of converting that raw sap into maple syrup. We're going to touch on each part of this, but we can't cover it all in a short time, so there'll be lots of extra questions, I'm sure, and feel free to contact George or I at our locations if you have more questions or seek out more information that we've provided at the end to help answer your questions. Well, the first thing you need is to identify which trees to tap. And in Vermont, we really focus on two species, the sugar maple and the red maple. They have similar traits. They're maples, so they have opposite budding orientation. The twigs are slightly different. Sugar maple will have more of a brown twig that will have some small white dots or lenticels. The bud on a sugar maple will tend to be small, chestnut brown, and pointed on the end. Some people refer to it as a chocolate chip bud. And the bark on a sugar maple will tend to be rougher. It'll be smooth when it's a small sapling, but gradually it'll become more rough. When the leaves are out, you have a 5-lobed, sort of a classic maple leaf shape, and the leaf margin, the edge of the leaf, will be smooth. Red maple, the other tree that you would tap for collecting sap, has a reddish twig. Will also have those white dots on the new growth on the end of the twig. The buds, instead of being pointed and dark brown, will be rounded and a rich red color typically. When the leaves are out, they will have a more serrated leaf margin or edge, so you can compare that. And red maple leaves tend to be more 3-lobed than sugar maple, which is the 5-lobe. The bark on red maple typically will be very smooth and in light gray. As the tree ages, it'll develop what some people call cat faces. On that picture on the right, you'll see is red maple bark. That kind of platiness gets broken with these horizontal little cracks, which can kind of look like a target or a cat face, some people call it. Both these trees can be tapped for sap collection. Now, the mystery of sap flow is pretty extensive. It's been studied at the University of Vermont for over 100 years, and there's still some parts to the process that are yet to be fully fleshed out. But in general, most of you probably know that you need to have a dormant tree, so the leaves can't be on, and you need to have weather that includes a freezing event, below freezing temperature, followed by a warming or a thawing above freezing temperature. This often happens with a day or night sort of cycle. Sap can flow in the fall, and it does in some cases, but we really only get the ideal number of days or enough days to make it make sense to tap a tree in the spring. So that's why we tap trees in the spring. You might want to hit pause right now and digest this slide. There's a lot going on, but basically what you want to take away from this is when the tree is capable of sap flow, when the tree is thawed, you get a freezing event, and the tree will actually go into a negative pressure. It will suck moisture up from the ground. The next day or whenever it thaws again, that moisture that's been drawn up from the roots into the stem and fine branches will then be able to be collected out of the tap hole. A lot of that sap will flow down into the spout and out into a bucket or a tubing system. So once you've identified the maples on your property that you are potentially going to use for sap collection, you have to decide which ones are appropriate for tapping. Generally, we look for trees that are in the 10 to 12 inch DBH, and by DBH we mean diameter at breast height. So this is the diameter of the stem at 4.5 feet off the ground. We want trees to be healthy when you're tapping them, and they need to be accessible. So it doesn't really help to have trees a couple of miles into the woods. The chances of you doing that for a couple of trees and collecting the sap is pretty low. So make sure that you have good access. And a good opportunity to check to see if the trees are healthy is to give it a good visual inspection, not just in the winter, but in the summer when the leaves are up. There are lots of things that can impact the health of sugar maples. A lot of them are native and are common. Some things like the Asian longhorn beetle, luckily we do not have in the state yet. But by and large, if landowners are looking at their trees and taking the time to inspect, they'll be able to identify things if a tree is healthy or if it has some issues. We can't go into any real detail here about pathology or entomology, but there are resources through UVM entomology and UVM extension to help you identify what you think might be a pest, and we encourage you to ask those questions and reach out for more help. So once you have your trees and you have you're all set and ready to tap, there are some basic equipment that you'll need. Certainly need a drill bit, something to make that new hole in the tree. And perhaps you don't know, but you need to drill a new hole every year. If you're a first-time sugar maker, you might realize not know that every year needs to be a new hole in the tree, because the tree is able to heal that wound and will no longer produce sap after the tree has grown. So you need a drill bit, you need a drill, and a lot of people, you'll see the images of a bit and brace, an old-fashioned drill. Many people will just use a cordless drill. They're very common now, and they do a really nice job. You need to make sure you have spouts that will match, or a drill bit that will match the spouts that you've selected. We'll talk a little bit about what's out there. There's lots of options. You need a mallet or a small hammer. You don't want a big, huge, heavy sledgehammer. Just a nice small mallet will do. And either tubing or a bucket with a cover. For a long, long time, the standard diameter of your tap hole was 7/16 of an inch. The industry has really gone away from that. We now use a smaller size spout, or 5/16 of an inch. It produces a smaller wound in the tree, and you collect basically the same amount of sap as you do with those larger bits. As I said before, you need to drill a new hole every year, and if you see the pictures on the lower right, when you're tapping, you want to be able to see nice, clean, white wood. If you see brown wood coming out of that tap hole when you're drilling, you've hit into either an old tap hole or some other damage that's within the tree. Those tap holes will really will not run very well as a result. So got to make sure you're into good, clean wood. So use your drill and make a nice clean hole, just in and out once. You don't go in and out several times, or you certainly don't want to rotate the drill bit around. You want to make one nice clean hole in and out. And also avoid tapping directly above or below an old tap hole if you see one. The tree's internal response to that wound makes an area of wood that won't conduct sap anymore. And then, like I said, if you tap into that brown wood, you'll get very little sap out of it. Here's a little diagram just showing how, if you were to set up a tubing system, kind of the key elements. You've got what's called a lateral line. These are the flexible lines that you see running from tree to tree. At every tree, you need to have a T-fitting, which will take sap from the tree and connect it with the lateral lines. You also need a small chunk of that lateral line material to connect to a spout, and that's called the drop line. This allows you to spread the area that you're tapping around the whole part of the tree and avoid tapping all in one area. And then the T-fitting, down below that, the line connects to either a pail or a collection tank. In larger operations, you'll use something called a main line, which is essentially more rigid, larger diameter pipe. You can think of a tubing system as sort of a stream system, smaller streams feeding into a larger river. And the lateral line material is 5/16 or the newer 3/16 diameter tubing is available. And you can use tubing on even one or two spouts or two trees, and you can go, obviously the sky's the limit as far as the number of trees you tap with tubing. So, like I said, the industry standard is now 5/16 of an inch spout, and we drill about 1.5 to 2 inches deep. It's good to use a drill stop or something to prevent you from drilling too deep into the tree. You don't get that much more sap, and you end up making a little larger wound. When you put the spout into the tree, you need to give just light taps to set the spout in the tree. You don't want to really hit it too hard and risk cracking the bark, cracking the inner wood of the tree. Drop lines in a tubing system tend to be 2 to 3 feet long, and when you're running a tubing system, it needs to be tight and straight and downhill. There's no limit to the complexity of a tubing system, at least when you haven't never worked with one before. But there's some simple basic things that you need to know, and I would certainly recommend searching out some more detailed information on how to lay out a tubing system. The best way to maximize sap production is to use a clean new spout every year. Research has pretty clearly shown that putting a new spout in the tree every year is the best way to maximize production. So tapping guidelines. These are sort of a set of guidelines, or not necessarily rules, but recommendations on how large a tree to tap and how many taps to put in. We don't recommend tapping below a 10-inch tree in diameter, and from roughly 10 to 17 inches, they can receive 1 tap. Greater than that, do 2 taps. And we don't recommend any more than 2 taps. In fact, a lot of producers are going to just 1 tap per tree, regardless of diameter. The larger the tree can support more than 1, but there is a limit to how many taps you should put in. Also, it's important not to put the tap in the same general area year after year. What can happen is you can have a collection of tap holes, as you see on the right, lower right image, is an area where you've had multiple taps in the same area year after year. And the internal staining, the wounding associated with tapping, can end up producing quite a bit more staining and damage than it would have if you scattered them all around. If you're using tubing and you are using a vacuum system, recommendations are around 5 taps per lateral line, perhaps even as many as 10. With the newer 3/16 tubing without a vacuum pump, people are going up much higher, the number of taps on that lateral. But you need to remember that if you have a problem with that one line, all those taps can be affected. So when to tap? This is always a topic of much discussion, especially as we get closer and closer to the season. Traditionally, the town meeting day, which is the first Tuesday in March, was said to be the start of the tapping season. But sap can flow well before that. Sap flow does not follow a calendar. some of the research has shown that tapping early really isn't that big of a penalty. So it is okay to tap in February for sure, and many people have done that successfully. What you want to do is tap when the tree is not totally frozen, so not on a bitterly cold day in January, but wait for temperatures to moderate a little bit, something above 20 degrees Fahrenheit or so, and you should be okay. You're really trying to avoid cracking or tapping into frozen wood and causing more damage. The one thing we'll say, though, is if you do tap into that tree, be ready for sap. So it may not be running the day you're actually tapping, but as soon as it warms up and the tree starts flowing, you need to have everything ready to go if you want to produce sap. So with sap collection, when the trees are really running, you should plan on having storage for 1 or 2 gallons per tap per day. All your containers need to be food grade or rated for potable water. Tubing systems are definitely popular. Tubing was invented as a labor-saving device, so you didn't have to go to every tree every day. But you do need to have a little bit more equipment. You need to have a collection tank for all that sap. Buckets obviously is a timeless method of collecting sap. Some buckets contain lead, so you need to be careful about what equipment you're using and is it contributing lead to your sap. It's also important to collect when the sap is running. So sap will spoil. It's a liquid that has sugar in it, and microorganisms will certainly try to digest some of that sugar, and it can spoil your sap. So make sure you cleared your schedule, so when the sap comes, you're ready to collect and boil. There's lots of containers that can hold liquid but are not appropriate for sap collection. A lot of galvanized equipment has high levels of lead and need to be careful about. And also, plastic garbage cans are really not food grade. They're made of reground plastic, so there's really no knowing what chemicals are involved in that plastic or what they were holding before. So find a source for good food grade plastic barrels. There are sources around, and feel free to ask us for help on finding those. So we're going to move on now to you've collected some sap, actually turning that sap into maple syrup. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to George Cook.
Hello, I'm back again. As we see here, there are a number of backyard situations that perhaps we've all seen or experienced, may have even done some of these ourselves. I absolutely love the ingenuity of backyard sugar makers when it comes to devising a way to turn sap into syrup. These are really pretty comical, some of them, to look at, and takes us back to yesteryear. If you are going to make syrup in your backyard, you need some place that you're going to be boiling it. It may not be as fancy as this. It could very well be similar to some of the shots that you saw in the last slide there. But we're going to talk about a variety of possibilities for you and how you go about doing that. Obviously, you're looking for a building that you can house your boiling equipment in, and this is called the sugar house. And as with most farm buildings, if you build one, you probably will put additions on it, as you can see here as time goes on. The evaporator inside is basically the instrument that's going to convert your sap to syrup with a lot of boiling. These evaporators can be pricey. You certainly can look around. You can find deals. You can check with the equipment suppliers. Sometimes they'll have good used equipment that you can find for a very reasonable price. Do beware of older equipment that could have lead in it, lead solder. If you're looking at brand new, as you can see here, you can spend anywhere from around $1,000, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, depending on what you find for a deal. The 2x4 obviously is going to be much more, and then 2x6, quite a lot more. You can easily spend $5,000-$6,000 on a 2x6 brand new evaporator. But think about what your options are and what you really need. We'll be looking at some of the requirements as we go through these slides. And when you buy an evaporator, you don't always get all the parts and pieces in that purchase price. There are other fittings and so forth that you need. As you can see here, we've listed quite a few other necessities that kind of go along with it. And just to reiterate, for collecting your sap or storing your syrup, Mark mentioned never to use non-food grade containers, and that certainly is good advice that you need to remember. So what size evaporator do I need? There are some questions that help you decide that. How many taps do you have? How many gallons of sap are they going to produce? How much time do you have? What time do you get home from work? Are you going to start boiling at 5 o'clock? What time would you like to go to bed tonight? Depending on the rate at which your evaporator will work, that can determine bedtime. So as you can see, there's some information here, figuring a gallon or more of sap per tap per day, thinking about your starting time, your hopeful quitting time, and so forth. This all goes into deciding what you need for an event. Sizing of that evaporator, just to give you some real quick rule of thumb, if you've got 10 to 50 taps, then some of these small single pan units, there are some that have special names. The half pint, that's actually a picture of the half pint there in the upper right. If you have, from 50 to 300, then you might be reaching the size where you're going to need more of a commercial setup, such as a 2x4 or a 2x6 evaporator. And these are made for producing syrup. But that may be a ways down the road, depending on how many trees you have and how large you want to go. Remember, you want to crawl before you walk and walk before you run. Start off smaller and then work your way up. How much sap does it take to make a gallon of syrup? Well, I'm sure you've all heard folks say, and in very rough figures, it takes 35 to 40 gallons of sap to make a gallon of syrup. Well, why do we say 35 to 40? The average sap is going to be anywhere from 2 to 2.5% sugar. And as you see here, if you take the number 86, divide it by the sugar content of the sap, say in this example 2.4% sap, 86 divided by 2.4, that's 36 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. That's not bad. That would be very good. Towards the end of the season, the sugar content is quite apt to drop, and you can get down to maybe only 1.5% sugar in the sap. Look at the math there, 57 gallons to make 1 gallon of syrup. Different evaporators will evaporate at different rates. As you see here, some of you may be the size where you only have 2 or 3 buckets or taps that you're pulling the sap in with the tubing. And a turkey fryer may be just, what you need. It's a small initial beginning project. Get the kids involved with it. And evaporation rate for a turkey fryer, probably about a gallon per hour. It's going to take a while. You get up to a 2x3 flat bottom pan, you see it's up to 5 to 8 gallons of sap processed per hour, and so forth on up through. So that a 2x6 with standard features, 25 to 30 gallons of sap per hour that you can process. And you see the example there at the bottom, 100 taps, 100 gallons of sap. This is looking at the 2x4, 100 gallons of sap at say 15 to 20 gallons of sap per hour. You do the math, and you're going to be there a little bit. Firing up, in a word, I'd say careful. be careful. If you're familiar with burning wood, then you understand a lot of those situations. But it's a good idea to have the right equipment, firing gloves, or these are just plain old welding gloves. You're building your fire in the arch, giving plenty of airspace. That's the way you're going to get a quicker, hotter fire to boil your sap. When I am running my evaporator, I actually use an egg timer. You see the one up there on the left, and I set it for about 7 minutes, and every time that timer goes off, I add more wood to the fire. That way you're maintaining a good steady boil in your evaporator, and you're not going to lose time every time it stops boiling. If you let the fire go down, then it mixes with the less cooked sap and it just postpones the next draw off. So if you're trying to maintain a good steady draw off pattern, a good steady boil, that timer is it's a godsend. It's wonderful. It helps get me into the habit of firing so that I can maintain that consistency. Running an evaporator is going to vary from unit to unit. I boil with roughly 3/4 of an inch to an inch in the pan. I'm using a defoamer about every time that I fire up. And there are various kinds of defoamer. We'll mention that in a later slide. And at the end of the day, I do shift from hardwood to softwood. I just find that it lets the evaporator and the arch cool down faster, so that I only have ash in the bottom of the fireplace at the end instead of a lot of hot coals. It allows me to go inside at night and sleep more peacefully. I always leave a good depth of sap in the pans when I go in at night, so that the heat that is down below does take a while to cool off. You want to leave enough so that it's not going to have dry pans in the morning. That wouldn't be good. Evaporation performance, basic rigs, as you see, the little half-pint unit has a much smaller evaporation ability. As you get bigger, then you can take more syrup off per hour or per day. The key thing is to maintain a steady hot fire. This is a small fan that I purchased, and any of the big evaporators, you'll see they do have a forced draft system where they're forcing air in underneath the fire. It makes for a nice steady fire, and this did the trick. And you can pick these up at local stores, and as it says, this was the best $16 spent. It's just a small 9-inch 3-speed fan that blows air up underneath and keeps that fire really rolling. For defoamer, and we use defoamer if you've ever made fudge or candy in the kitchen, you know that it does tend to boil up and can go over the side of the pan. That's no different with maple sap. And so what we use are vegetable oil based products. There's a dry powder product that you see in the upper left picture, beside it a commercial liquid defoamer. If you're only using your syrup for home, for known audience, known consumers that are not allergic to dairy products, yes, you could use cream or butter or even milk to keep the foam down. But if you might be giving it or selling it to anyone that possibly might have an allergy, we recommend that you use a commercial defoamer or a vegetable oil. Don't overdo it. It only takes a little bit. Thus, don't use one of those spray bottles. How do you know when you've got syrup? Well, syrup boils at 7 to 7.5 degrees Fahrenheit above the boiling temperature of water. So you could take a thermometer, boil water in it, see where it's boiling on that thermometer, and then add 7.5 degrees to it, and that'll get you very close to your maple syrup. So if you have a candy thermometer, that would be a basic piece of equipment that you need. Sugar makers are actually using thermometers on their rig. They also are using a hydrometer, as you see in the upper right-hand corner picture, and that is designed to float as the syrup gets thicker. And if you look close, there's a red line right at the surface of the syrup, and that tells us that we have legal density syrup. The last thing in the process of boiling is going to be, once we have maple syrup, we take it off the evaporator. Immediately we dump it through a filter or a strainer, and most of us are using both the paper pre-filter, that top picture there, the left is the pre-filter, and that goes inside of the felt filter to the right. And usually these are inside of a canning unit, or in the early days, I simply had them on a rack, and they would strain into a stainless steel stock pot, and that gives you a nice, clear product, which is desirable, and if you're ever selling it, it's required. When we are grading maple syrup, we're basically comparing it to 4 basic standards. It has to be proper density. In other words, it has to be thick enough. It has to meet the proper color for the grade that it's being labeled. It has to be clear and cannot be cloudy. That's why we're filtering it and straining it. We're getting out a product that's called niter, which is a naturally occurring mineral that precipitates out of sap as it's being boiled, and can settle out as kind of a very fine sediment. And finally, taste it. What's it taste like? It's got to meet the standard for that particular grade. So I mentioned the standards we're looking at. This is a temporary grading kit that many folks are using, and basically they're putting a sample of syrup in the 4th bottle to the right, and then comparing it with the 3 color grades that you see there, and it has to be equal to or lighter than a particular grade to be graded that way. For home use, you don't necessarily need to do this, but as I say, if you're giving it or ever selling it, it's a requirement, and consumers just like to know what they're buying. Last step, what are we going to put it in, and how are we going to do it? Today, everyone hot packs syrup, which means we're bringing the syrup before putting it into the container up to 180 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Fill the container right up to within a 1/4 inch of the top. Put the cap on securely, and then immediately I lay the container on the side. That makes sure that the entire interior surface of the container comes in contact with that very hot syrup, and basically sterilizes it. If there were any airborne spores, yeast spores or anything, it instantly kills them, and I can open up syrup that's been put up this way 2-3 years later, and it's just as nice as the day I put it up. Make sure that the containers you're putting in are new, clean, and we want to avoid problems. Syrup in storage, if we did not cook it enough, it wasn't thick enough, it is low density, that can tend to spoil and ferment, as we see the container in the top. That thing looks like it's about ready to blow. Don't open it in the kitchen. If it's cooked too much, it is actually too dense, and the excess sugar that's concentrated will crystallize over time, and that's not what you wanted. You wanted liquid syrup, not sugar crystals. For further information, you can always contact Mark or I. This information on this slide is something that you very well would like to refer back to. You see our access information, george.cook@udm.edu, and then the toll-free number, and Mark Isselhart, mark.isselhart@udm.edu. You can also go to our UVM Extension Maple website. There are other websites that we'd recommend you take a look at. The Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association, VMSMA. You see that one at the top. And actually, I'm looking at that one there, vtmaple.org. That has been changed. That is spell the word out. Vermont, VERMONT, maple.org. And that will get you to the proper website. Another website listed is the UVM Proctor Maple Research Center. A lot of great information there. That's where all the research is done here in the state. There's a maple manual listed and shown below. That's a wonderful resource for your library if you're looking. Please don't hesitate to call either Mark or I at any time. We're here and are more than willing to answer questions and help you out with anything that might come up with your future backyard sugaring operation. Have fun.